Well, terrific. I'm really thrilled to be here with the three of you and more to the point with the hundreds of you out here in the audience who are doing the important work of actually promoting education policy that's good for all students across the United States. I am utterly thrilled, especially that the Education Commission of the States is continuing. It's really quite amazing and I think unique commitment to civic education, to highlighting its importance, to supporting policymakers, educators, researchers who are interested in trying to figure out how civic education works in this country, how it can be improved, and how we can strengthen democracy as a whole. Because it's often these days, especially, a fairly forgotten stepchild. And it's crucial, in fact, to the maintenance of our democracy. And so I'm especially grateful to the three of you governors for taking out your extremely limited time to talk with me about this. Just so that you know, I'm going to set the stage for a minute or two. Then the four of us will have a real conversation. And then we're going to try to reserve at least 15 minutes to have a Q&A from the audience. As a former teacher, middle school teacher myself, I know how frustrating it is merely to sit and be talked at as opposed to have the opportunity to talk and learn with others. And so as you're sitting here, as questions arise, jot them down to yourself, because we will take time near the end for you to ask questions and have some conversation with the three governors. So just to take a brief minute to talk about why I think that ECS exercises so much foresight in keeping civic education on the agenda in the individual states and across the United States as a whole. I think that we need to remember that not only were public schools founded, in fact, for civic purposes, in order to help prepare citizens of a totally new country with a new political system unlike any that existed in the world. And there was an idea that to have this new political system, we also needed a new kind of citizen. We couldn't depend on the old world for models. We couldn't depend on what people's parents or grandparents had done, the roles they had played, because we were a new country with a new democratic republic that required citizens to take on different roles. We are still being asked to take on different roles today than roles that that either our founders imagined more than 200 years ago, and then anybody has ever had to take on in the history of the world. We have new civic roles with respect to digital citizenship, the effect that actions that we take, that in fact a kid can take in a classroom in Seattle, can redound across the United States and across the globe if they post a particularly effective video, if they post a particularly effective blog post. We have communications running globally, and also governments that are trying to both facilitate certain kinds of communications, monitor other kinds of communications, shut down communications, and we now need young people to learn how to operate in this new world in which civic action takes place not only offline, but online, not only with people whom they may live near or know from home, from school, from church, from their parents' workplace, but also people that they have never met and may never meet, but with whom they feel that they share some kind of common cause. This is a new world that we are raising children into, that we ourselves are not actually sure how to meet and how to address. What are our own responsibilities? How do we direct our own limited energies toward our families, towards our local geographic communities, towards our work communities, our faith communities, our national or international communities? And how do we teach young people who will simultaneously have more power in certain ways than we ever have, but also be more subject to the vagaries of global commerce, of global politics, of the global environmental change and so forth, to take effective, thoughtful, informed, productive, collaborative action in this new world? That's a really hard task. And it's an incredibly hard task, not only for any adult to understand, but then also for us to help the nearly 4 million teachers in this country help guide their students through. Because as we struggle, so are they going to struggle. And many teachers have taken on their roles as teachers not because they think of themselves as committed to promoting the maintenance, preservation, and improvement, say, of American democracy and of common citizenship, but because, say, they love kids, which is a wonderful reason to become a teacher, but in and of itself does not necessarily equip them to be the effective civic educators that they need to be for a new generation as we enter into a new world. So those are some of the challenges that we face. At the same time, we have amazing opportunities. We have a Common Core that places an emphasis on, among other things, engaging with nonfiction texts and reading deeply and thinking deeply, and then acting and communicating about a whole variety of things, which may include recent court cases, legislation, news articles, and so forth. We have the opportunity through the new C3 frameworks that are a voluntary act of 22 states to try to create new social studies frameworks in history, civics, economics, and geography to bring civic education, again, more to the fore. We have amazing opportunities now for students to learn citizenship and take civic action from their own classrooms. Again, digital technologies can permit this, youth voice, student leadership, et cetera. And we have a clear recognition in this country that we need better citizens, that right now our country, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, we have a lot of dysfunctional civic institutions that need more engaged citizens and more productive citizens. And so that's an opportunity that I think we have in schools to take on the resources and create better citizens for our really challenging future. So with that, I want to turn to our three governors, and we'll start here with Governor Sandoval, and then go to Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Nixon, and start by asking you, again, you have many calls on your time. I'm sure that if you were not here, you could be doing many, many other things that are important. What is it that attracted you to participate in this panel? Why is education for citizenship important to you? And what are you proud of having achieved with regard to civic education in your state?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and probably what's most inspirational for me is since I've become governor, I've had the opportunity to visit over 200 schools. And as I go to these different classrooms, and it's everything from kindergarten all the way through high school, and see and contemplate what we've talked about today is the citizenship and involvement in civics, and you see all the different ranges on the spectrum as to student involvement. I'll go to a second grade class, and I'll tell them, I've got a magic wand, and I'm going to have you all stand up, and you're suddenly 18, and you're going to be eligible to vote. So let's say we have a class size of 30 kids. I'll have them all stand up, and then I'll tell half of them to sit down because they were eligible to vote, but they didn't register to vote. So 15 of them will sit down. And then I'll have 8 more of them sit down because I'll tell them on election day, even though you had registered to vote, you didn't go and vote that day. And so there'll be 7 of them, and then I'll have 3 of them sit down and say, see, and then I'll point to the other last 4 kids, and I'll tell the rest of the kids, you see those 4 kids? They just elected me governor of the great state of Nevada. And it makes it really real for them. I've also had the opportunity to judge different competitions, the We the People, and it's very inspiring for me to see these kids that are learning about the Constitution or presenting in front of a mock congressional panel. I've gone to Boys State, Girls State, and talk to them about their civic involvement. We have a youth legislature in Nevada. We just finished our legislative session, and to see their involvement. One of the things I struggle with is this new social media and how it's a different dynamic from when I was growing up and how kids get their news. I mentioned this yesterday. I have a son who's going to be a senior in high school. I have a daughter who's going to be a junior in high school, and I have another daughter who's going into 3rd grade. And the way they get their current events is very different than the way we get them today. So that's For us in Nevada, I mentioned during my preliminary or my remarks that yes, social studies is part of our curriculum. Senator Sagaski has really put an exclamation point on that in terms of making that important. But I think it's, as I talk to some of these kids and visit these schools, it's really important, obviously, for them to know what's going on, to be able to process like these Supreme Court cases that have come out in the last few days at the end of the term. The other thing I mentioned in my remarks is I do like to read a lot about history. And I just finished a book that talked extensively about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And they talked about people coming from all over the state of Illinois, 50,000 people to listen to these debates at all these small communities throughout. And I think, what happened? What happened? Why isn't it like that today when you have a U.S. Senate contest or governor's contest? And so that's why I was particularly struck by some of the literature that you have published with the importance of citizenship and civics and getting these students from an early age and getting them where they're going to be able to understand current events, what it means to really look at issues. I really enjoy it as governor, and I'm sure the other governors have the same experiences as I do when you go visit a classroom or you get a stack of letters from a high school class and you respond to each of them, and each student has a different topic in it. And as I said, it makes it very inspiring for me to say they're involved, but there are a lot that are not. And you ask them, can you name one person on the U.S. Supreme Court? Can you name who your elected representatives are? So this is why I'm here today on this panel, is to learn from the other governors, learn from you, and learn from the members of ECS what best practices are.
Thank you, Governor Sandoval. Governor.
And I guess a big part of this, certainly the importance of this is that for this country to do anything, people have to believe, right? They have to believe in their government. There has to be some connection, and I'm the opposite, the person who didn't believe. And I grew up, I was a skinny kid with thick glasses and acne, and no one was ever going to ask me to run for student council, and I didn't really hang out with those people that did run for student council, if I can be blunt. And I didn't go into the state legislature. I had my own life, and when you don't know anything about anything, in my school, when I grew up, we didn't have any civics program. And if you don't know anything about something, generally, you're more likely to be intimidated by it or keep it at arm's length. And that's part of, this is the first time I've worn a necktie in a couple months, because when I was out campaigning for governor in the rural parts of Colorado, people kept saying, you big shots from Denver think you can come out here with your $2,000 suits and $300 neckties and intimidate us, right? And after I heard that, or something like that 3 or 4 times, I said, all right, if I get elected, I won't wear a necktie, because it does keep a distance. There is a power distance from how you dress compared to the people you're trying to connect with. And the real challenge with civics is, how do we make sure that people feel closer to government, not further away? And how do they have an attraction? I mean, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, people came from all over the place. They had one great advantage back then. They didn't have TV, right? And there was pretty much a limited source of facts, right? You got newspapers, and there were pamphlets that would get spread around, but it was fairly limited. I was speaking up at the University of Colorado, a wonderful professor there named Patty Limerick, and one of her grad students said, so Governor, where do you get your facts, right? And that becomes one of the critical questions of the day, and part of our job is to make sure that we're credible, right? That we're the repository of real facts. And there's a huge burden on us to make sure that people understand the structure of government and how it all works, but also, that they can rely on us if we tell them that this is the part of education that works, this doesn't work, that we're not just making it up or giving an opinion, we're giving them real facts.
I think you catch a pretty clear flavor that governors, and especially these two, which have had a significant national leadership on all sorts of education issues, spend a lot of time at schools as kind of visitors and participants. We come in and folks come to us, and so we get these snippets, and communities are very different, and you pick up a lot of nuance and flavor between the communities. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're interested, is we spend a lot of time in schools and constantly trying to make them better. I do think that we always kind of wondered how Governor Sandoval was so successful, but I think when you've got second graders voting, no wonder you get large percentages. To try that in a re-election effort one of these years. But, and Brian and I don't take it badly that we were involved in student council in high school, John.
Yes.
We were moderately cool also. But the two reasons why I'm here is that I think that the two larger trends that are going on that touch civics that are very important and very real is, first of all, the kids that are in school now have a significant difference from any of us. And that difference is the challenges they will face will be as world citizens, not just as United States citizens. The competition of the future is on every floor in every factory and every school and every business site, because of the information age, has become a worldwide competition. And so they no longer are able to define success by just being succeeding in their classroom or their county or their state. And the only way that you become a world citizen is by understanding civics and policy and the history, quite frankly, as Governor Sandoval said, of how we all got here and what the future is. So I think that additional responsibility of these young folks to compete and win in a much broader world. And if we don't understand who we are competing with and who we are working with, then the result will be a conflict as opposed to working together. And the second reason I'm here is, it's just once again on a little bit of a Nixon saw here, is the difference between politics and policy and governing. They are in fact different. And I think we've got this meshing of them right now where people are saying that politics is the policy, or politics is the governing. I think politics is merely the method you use to get to one of these seats. To get to be the head of your state or the head of your local school board or whatever. Then you get to the policy. And I think that there has become this meshing where even in the news, you'll flip to pick a newspaper, arbitrarily, the Post-Dispatch. Literally on the politics section is where they report what Senator Pierce and Representative Cookson do in their work in the Education Committee in the House and the Senate. That's not politics, it's policy. And it's up to us as we train citizens to not let them have the luxury of saying it's all a fight and it's all something about differences, because if we're going to make progress, we got to bust through the politics and get to the policy and the real issues that are out there. And I think that, quite frankly, in the modern society we're in, dumping things in the category of politics when you talk about civic duty allows people to be simplistic and lazy and fall into an intellectual campaign mode of this. And I think we have to bust through that. And the best place to do that, the best place to start that, is with the young folks in our schools.
Great. I want to come back to the politics versus policy distinction in a minute and introduce partisanship as a sort of third P. But before we do that, I want to come to something that really all three of you have made reference to, especially Governor Sandoval and Hickenlooper, which are the differences and disparities in civic engagement and a sense of civic membership and civic power. So you both mentioned that, say in your extremely evocative thing with the second graders, having half of them sit down, that we do have real disparities in civic engagement and civic empowerment in this country. It's not a random set of the 50% of the second graders who are sitting down. We know that those who are less likely to be registered to vote, less likely to vote, less likely ever to have contacted an elected official or appointed government official, less likely to have ever testified, say, at a public hearing, or even attended a protest, that those people are it's less likely that you've done those things if you are low income, if you have lower levels of education, and if you are not white or African American. So if you're Hispanic or an Asian citizen, you're much less likely to have done those things. Just say thinking about voting in the 2012 election, where there was a lot that was made about, say, the growing Hispanic vote in the United States and how that's creating potentially a shifting alignment among the Republicans and the Democrats in terms of trying to attract the Hispanic vote. It is true that Hispanic citizens voted at greater rates than they did before, but still, in fact, 48% of Hispanic citizens in this country voted in the 2012 elections. So over half of Hispanic citizens did not vote. That's compared, and 47% of Asian citizens voted in this country. That's compared to over 60%, 62% of whites and 66% of blacks. So in fact, whites and blacks were 50% more likely to have voted in the 2012 election. With income, similarly, poor citizens barely half voted, whereas wealthier citizens, more than 3/4 voted. And in education especially, those who didn't graduate from high school, 38% of non-high school graduates voted who were citizens, whereas 78% of college graduate citizens voted. So you're twice as likely to have a voice, in fact, in the 2012 election if you were a college graduate. So I'm curious, we have a lot of disparities. I've characterized this as a civic empowerment gap that I've argued in work that I've published should be taken as seriously as the academic achievement gap. That we rightly take the academic achievement gap incredibly seriously because it actually predicts lifelong trajectories for, say, college, for career, and in fact for citizenship, and that we want to, that if we're going to be a democracy, we need to have all citizens empowered. We need to know that all citizens have an equal voice, have an equal chance of being heard. And so I'm curious, do you agree? I mean, you both, the two of you especially, seem to raise this implicitly. Would you agree that reducing the civic empowerment gap should become an educational priority in order to foster a more equal and inclusive democracy? Maybe we'll start with Governor Nixon and move this way this time.
I mean, I think that all of us believe that everybody should vote, but we also appreciate and fully understand that there's a responsibility of individual citizens to get informed. And I think there's a direct responsibility for schools to play a role in making sure that as John said earlier, I mean, folks need to feel powerful enough to do this. They need to be armed with the information. They need to be armed with the confidence. And the public school system is the place where that confidence can build. Because I think a whole section of people, don't vote. Some because they're unempowered. Some because they're intimidated by 45 things on a ballot and not sure what they're going to vote for or who they're going to vote for. But I think unless we use civic engagement in the education sector to give people not only the confidence but also the responsibility to have their voices heard, we're going to continue to lag behind here. And so we'll have a government and a policies. If people don't bother to vote, then they're certainly not going to feel deferential to the policies of the people that are elected. They won't feel that they had a voice, and it'll further disengage them. So I think that beginning very early to make sure that you have knowledge and responsibility to drive these numbers up is a crucial issue to the future of our democracy, especially as we become more diverse every day.
And I appreciate Governor Nixon's perspective of that everybody should vote, although I think it was Teddy Roosevelt said, probably not everybody. Everyone should vote who wants to vote for me. That's really who should vote. I thought the statistics Dr. Levinson gave were very instructive but also alarming. I would twist it, because I'm sure you have the same statistics on young people, right?
Yes.
And each of us have a tremendous battle getting more money for schools, more money for education. And yet you look at part of the reason for that, at least part of the reason, is that kids that are eligible to vote, right, for the first few years, they don't vote, right? So of course we don't get funding that would help them or their peers most directly because we have that gap and that lack of again, that lack of feeling connection. There's a level of intimidation and quite frankly, a level of distraction, right? When I talk to young people, which I do, I spent almost 20 years in the tavern business, right? Brew pubs and rock and roll bands. And so I have a special way with young people, let's put it that way. Just kidding, that's a joke. Don't tweet that. But I think that the fact of the matter is that they, to a large extent, they're too busy in their own bubble to really make the effort to get the information, like Jay says, and to really go out and integrate that in themselves and feel comfortable with voting. And that is a big challenge. It's something we've got to address.
No, and I'll follow up from the other governor's remarks, which is there is a relationship between being informed and I think going out and voting. And it's a challenge because I watch my kids and you talked about the news. They don't watch the news. They get all their information from the computer and from social media and those types of things. Probably one of my most challenging but best moments as governor, and Governor Hickenlooper alluded to it, is these budget challenges we had with regard to funding education. And my first term, we had a billion-plus deficit, so there was a real struggle between funding education. And halfway through the legislative session, there were in excess of 1,000 college students that had been bused from Las Vegas to Carson City. They they camped out on the Capitol lawn. They called it Sandoval. And the next day, they all lined up in the Capitol, and they had a letter to deliver on that issue. And I decided to go out there and greet every single one of them, because even though they didn't like me very much that day, I was so proud of them for having traveled 500 miles to come to Carson City and to have their voice heard and deliver this message. And there's no doubt in my mind that each and every one of those young men and women are going to vote. And that was a microcosm, is if we could get more of these students to get involved in some of those issues and feel empowered. And that's why I wanted to go out there and greet every single one of them, because I wanted them to look me in the eye, and I wanted to look them in the eye and listen to what they had to say, because they'll remember that forever. And they will go to the polls and they will learn about the state budget, they'll learn about education issues, all those things, and feel like their vote really matters.
So that brings us, I think, perfectly into some really tricky territory. You've all talked about the importance of being knowledgeable and helping kids learn stuff about civics, about government, about policy making, about the issues today. At the same time, all three of you have talked equally profoundly about young people actually acting and being citizens, not merely learning about citizenship. You mentioned that I probably had the statistics on young citizens, and yes, I do. So say in the 2012 election, we know that young people voted at much, much lower rates in the same kinds of proportions. So about 1/3 of Hispanic and Asian young citizens, ages 18 to 24, voted, and 40% of white citizens and 49% of black citizens voted. In terms of education, the disparities, again, are equally strong. So 18 to 24-year-old citizens with no high school diploma, 23% of them voted. So less than a quarter of of non-high school grads, whereas 63% of college grads who are citizens ages 18 to 24 voted. So again, a vast disparity. But in all cases, much lower than we want, right? As you said, we have young people acting less than we want them to. So we need schools to teach young people about the issues of the day, about politics, about policy, about government, both here in the United States and across the world. And then we need schools getting young people active, actually having the experience of doing citizenship, of practicing citizenship, in the same way that they practice writing, they practice reading, they practice mathematics, doing experiments. But it's really dangerous, right? I mean, it's a lot of teachers talk about how threatened they feel and how worried they are for their jobs if they engage young people in action that can especially be perceived as being partisan. So I want to come back to your distinction, Governor Nixon, between politics and policy. Even if we could get that kind of distinction to be better understood, we still have the worry that people will see the actions that teachers are taking and that students are taking as being partisan and therefore not having a role, especially in public schools. And so I'm curious, we're talking about college students creating Sandoval, which is in a ways easier than, say, if high school students or middle schoolers had come to create Sandoval. Would you be comfortable in your visits to the schools that you make, seeing students, say, debating the recent Supreme Court decision invalidating Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, or debating whatever decision is likely to come down today, maybe being handed down right now, I don't know, about same-sex marriage, discussing drones against enemy combatants, and more than discussing in schools, actually taking action, either coming and trying to testify, writing letters, engaging in a protest. How would you feel about that as an elected official and as somebody who thinks about education policy in the states? And why don't we start with you, Governor Hickenlooper?
You know, I think, I mean, those are all good points. And I think part of this is the result of the intensity of media now. So when there is a problem in a classroom, a teacher is having this kind of a discussion on something that's very controversial and a crucial part of the civic debate at that moment, and some kid does something or says something that's very offensive, and then all of a sudden it blows up, and the teacher said something taken out of context, and people go crazy. To a certain extent, we all have an obligation, I think, to protect those teachers, right, that are engaging in that kind of discourse, to make sure if it does get out of hand, we figure out what should have been different, but to reiterate again and again that this is a crucial part of the educational process. And we see, we have a big high school, East High School in Denver. There's one, on the constitutional debate competition that they do each year. So they've won, I think, 4 times out of the last 10 years. And I remember 7 or 8 years when one of their classes there was a big controversy. I can't remember the details, but it was electric. And the principal came down and kind of defended the teacher who in their own time was coaching this debate team. And no one else really stood up. And I think that sends a message that if the state legislators, if the governor, if the mayor, if no one shows up and defends this kind of a situation, then it leaves a bad taste at other teachers in another situation and say, well, maybe I just stay away from it. And from a political point of view, I know darn well when one of those issues, one of those ugly scenes evolves, the smart money is to stay clear, right? To stay away from it, because you're going to pick up some of the dirt from the issue. The reality is, I think we all have to kind of push ourselves to go beyond the safe position and stand up for that teacher, or stand up for that kid, and say, hey, this is a crucial part of education, and we want more of this.
No, and I agree with Governor Hickenlooper. I think it's a great thing. I think that we should empower our teachers to have the confidence to encourage this critical, deep thinking on current events. As I said, I've visited the classrooms. I see the kids become more confident and want to get more involved when they start to learn about these things, and these laboratories, these classrooms for them to talk about these issues. It's a little bit unfortunate that the Supreme Court is going to be deciding all these cases when school is out. But again, there'll be an opportunity come the fall for them to consider this, or for them being the students to think about these things. So it would be very supportive of faculty, of teachers, being able to activate the students in terms of how they think about these current events, and let them see both sides. That's what's extremely important, so that they can come to their own conclusions. I referenced We the People, and they try to take these current events and teach the students and do these mock sessions in front of a legislative panel or a congressional panel. And when I talk to the students after they've made these presentations, they're really excited. They want to do it again. And once they gain this confidence, once they become familiar with these issues of the day, I think it's part of those roots that are going to stay with them for the rest of their lives.
I mean, it's funny, the different types of classes, the different subject matters, how they bring a different tone to it. I mean, in a math class, if somebody said, if a teacher said, you need to learn this, and this is how to work out this formula or whatever, and somebody said, I don't feel good about that, or I disagree with that, it wouldn't carry any weight at all. I mean, you got to get the answer, and the facts need to be there to get that answer. We've morphed over into science, where we've seen the very real issues of faith confront issues of Darwinism and all of the other pieces there, and you've seen it come over into the global warming side. And then by the time you get over into civics, it becomes a kind of sometimes an emotional yelling contest in which people use their positions, or their parents' positions, or their cousins' positions, or what they heard on TV or what they heard on the radio. And I think it's really important for teachers and education systems to distill the same level of fact-based arguments or fact-based proofs in the social sciences as they do in the hard sciences. I don't think they should be different. I think you should be required to have the same amount of proof for your position if you're talking on one side or the other about an education issue or a social policy issue as you do whether you're proving a formula or not. And I don't see where it's controversy at all for a teacher to engage students in a myriad of subjects I mean, you don't, in music, it would not be tolerated to say, no, I don't really like the way that Brahms wrote that. Here's the way I'm going to play lead violin, okay? But it becomes okay in social studies to say, oh, no, you're wrong. You know, I think that we need to have the same education-based, proof and fact-based discussions and education. And I do think that education has a real role there across the various subject matters to carry that day, and that's a responsibility of our public education system.
I'm interested in that because I actually think about, say, math education and science education as having now skewed closer to the kind of contestation that you're saying that social studies education should get away from. So say, in math education now, many of the major curricula are about students
I don't say there shouldn't be contention. I think contention is very natural. I think the difference of opinion and the difference of proofs. I mean, the same facts can prove many different things. I'm a lawyer by trade. I made my living 10 years ago. But all I'm saying is that going back to that base point, not letting the opinion or the position roll the day just itself, but to go back to, if somebody has a strong opinion about something, you know, in essence, make them show you how they came up with that opinion, and as a part of an education. It's not about, you know, I don't think education should ever be concerned about having differing opinions around. That's part of education, my golly. As you said, kids walk in with one opinion, they come out, the education is in fact changing that opinion of understanding the world. My gosh, before you go to geology class, you don't know about erosion, you know, whatever, you know, or gravity or whatever. I mean, so I don't think the difference of opinion is as important as it is requiring folks that have opinions or have a position to come to a rational method to get there, and that education can provide a key opportunity for that level of rational discourse.
That interestingly potentially brings us into the Common Core with its emphasis on evidence and on argumentation. That is arguably a step beyond what many state standards have required over the last decade or two. I'm curious if you will address what you see as the opportunities that the Common Core offers for, to you and your state in getting to the third C of citizenship education, and also if there are any impediments that you foresee in that regard. And why don't we start again with you, Governor Nixon?
Obviously, the Common Core, I believe, are very important. I believe challenging our kids and making sure that as a nation, we join together in saying and understanding that the future is going to be more challenging educationally, and that we need to raise standards, and that employers need to know what they get as far as a product of kids out of schools, and parents need to know when they go into schools what common things those students are going to have core competency in, and we need to continue to raise the bar in those areas. I'm a huge supporter of Common Core and the many good things it can do. And I think this is an important time for the education community because those that have a challenge with Common Core, I honestly, and there are some folks that do, and they're certainly entitled to those opinions, I don't understand really what their opposition is. I haven't had anybody, I've had, and so I think that this is a crucial time for a good national discussion about how important it is to challenge our kids, how important it is to have significant standards, how vital it is that we understand the broadening role that education has to have for us to succeed in the world. And the Common Core, for whatever reason, may be a centerpiece of that discussion, but it should be a strong centerpiece. I mean, quite frankly, a lot of work was done on Common Core before it got famous, and it's good stuff.
Governor Sandoval, and then we'll go to Governor Hickenlooper.
No, and we're going to be embracing the Common Core in Nevada. I mean, you talk about it, this evidence-based, and I'm a former federal judge, so I like that. I like the fact that you're going to be weighing these things. It's an important, it's going to be extremely important to the future of our kids. And I can only speak for the kids in Nevada. We want to raise the bar for all of them, and it's going to be a huge challenge. I'm very much looking forward to the panel tomorrow that we're going to have on Common Core. But you talk about that third C, the citizenship, and that goes back to what we've been talking about here. That's got to be a very important component of as we move forward. As I listen to the other governors, you think of all these different experiences that you've had, and I guess reaching back to your previous question about this critical thinking, but it does play into the Common Core is one of my proudest moments as a father, but also kind of brings a smile to my face as I was looking at my 16-year-old daughter's one of her papers in social studies, and they had a current event, and I read about it. I'm not going to say which one, but she was completely opposite of where I was on that position. And first I thought, wow, and then I hugged her because she was thinking, and she didn't automatically just agree with her dad. And that's what I want for every child, is that they think of everything, and boy, her more than anybody felt this pressure to be consistent with her dad, but she went exactly the other way. And so that tells me as she moves on further in life, she's going to have this confidence to think on her own. And that's what I want for every child, and I think the Common Core is going to go a long way to accomplishing that.
I do want to just say what a joy it is to be up here with two incredibly talented governors. Not all governors are as good as these guys. It's just a treat to hear stories like that. Common Core, I think part of it is there's a dynamic tension between local control and federal control. Or just we all deal with this on a daily basis in so many ways. And Common Core, the thing I loved about it was all the states working together collaboratively to create what are these things that we can all agree on, and then pass it back down. So in no way is it part of the federalism or the Washington trying to exert control over us. And yet that's the way it's being presented in a number of places. And that sense of unknown and what are the facts and the real facts. And there is a prevailing doctrinaire on almost every issue that is accepted, and even science. When I was a young geologist, I don't want to date myself, but I can guarantee you I'm the oldest person up here on this stage. I took geology, I got a master's in geology, and 8 years before I got that master's, no good scientist, no good geologist believed in continental drift, right? Plate subduction, what now everyone accepts, it makes perfect sense, but back then it was heresy. And that's the challenge. Each of these issues, there is in the back of people's minds, sometimes the world's wrong. And sometimes there becomes this flip, and all of a sudden the world switches to a different place. It doesn't mean that every heretic is right. Just the contrary. Most heretics are wrong, but, well, it's a fact, right? That's a joke. That's just, But I think that's what Common Core, some of the challenges that Common Core is facing is that we've lost control a little bit of that dialogue and the facts around it, where it came from, right? Like what Governor Nixon was saying, that we've got to keep that history fresh.
I'm going to tell people that in about 2 minutes, I'm going to ask one more question of our three governors, and then I'm going to invite you in the floor to ask questions. So if you want to catch, I know that we have a couple of microphones back there. If you want to catch the eyes of people holding the microphones, they can maybe come over and you can be positioned. So there's so many questions that I want to ask relating to this discussion. I'm going to randomly choose one, which is I want to get back to this question of facts, opinions, capacity to draw a totally different conclusion about a policy from those who are near and dear to you. And ask how in a world where there is so much ideological divide, in fact, around issues of education, because education is rightly understood as being political and not merely being about policy. Do you think that your state and as a nation, we can come together in order to move young people forward, especially when we think about moving young citizens forward, right? We use young people as pawns so much. And yet they are the ones who are going to be taking over, and they do need to have an understanding of what's in front of them, but our understandings can differ so widely, especially as we use social media, and so we enter into these pretty self-contained worlds, right, where my Google search results about gun laws may be entirely different from a neighbor's Google search results about gun laws, because Google has learned what we tend to read and directs us in different ways. And so I learn one thing about gun control, and he learns another thing about gun control, and so we don't even know how to talk to one another in a way that is mutually trusting as opposed to mutually antagonistic. Do you have any insights in your work? You've managed to draw people together. You've been elected as governors. You have insights as elected officials and as people who have spent a lot of time in schools and working with education policymakers about how we can get past some of this ideological mistrust in order to move forward. And Governor Sandoval.
No, it's a provoking question. I think one of the responsibilities is to, again, make sure that these students have all the information and not just one side, and that part of it is going to be helping them do this research on their own. You talk about this Google search, and it all depends on what words you put in there. And so, when there's a teacher teaching this class, it's just important for them to recognize these ideologies, but make sure that the students are exposed to all of them, and then they can draw their own conclusions.
And I think the partisanship has become so intense for a variety of reasons. And you talk about gun control. We passed a bill with universal background checks this last year, very divisive, and we couldn't get any Republicans to support it. Finally went back and got the real facts. Like in 2012, getting to only half the gun transactions didn't make a difference, right? Are criminals stupid? Sure enough, when you got the facts, 38 people accused or convicted of homicide, 133 of sexual assault, 640 burglars, 1,300 felony assaults, 420 people had judicial restraining orders. All these people tried to buy guns, and we stopped them, and we were only getting to half the people. So you have to figure out how to get the facts out, but the partisan nature of the debate now is, and part of that's attack ads, part of it is that sense that elected officials often have, if you put down your opponent, it raises you up, not recognize you have to work afterwards. And I mean, there's a reason why Coke and Pepsi don't do attack ads, right? If Coke didn't attack it, well, they work. They very clearly work, right? If Coke does an attack ad against Pepsi, Pepsi sales will go down, Coke will go up. But then Pepsi's going to do a counterattack against Coke, Coke attacks Pepsi, and then you diminish the entire product category of soft drinks. You sell less beverages. Some people would say not a bad thing, I understand that. But the bottom line is that what we're doing right now with these attack ads politically is we're diminishing the product category of democracy and making it very difficult to get past this partisan divide on things like the Common Core that shouldn't have any partisanship in it.
I mean, especially for the younger folks, we've got to make them feel relevant. And if they don't feel like they can touch it or they can have any effect, then they will live a policy-free, a civics-free life. Because you can lead them. You can very freely and openly in this country live an entire life without voting, without being involved, and there's no penalties for it. The only penalties are perhaps policy doesn't go where you want. So that lane is always open. And the lane we're defining is a harder lane. The lane we're defining requires you to defend your positions, study, be involved. So, I mean, we've got to, we have a joint responsibility to make sure they understand the relevance. But John mentioned before how in politics, I mean, you have all of these interests that are well-heeled, well-organized, and push policy, sometimes very precise policy. The places where you don't have that organization, I get approached by very few, grade schoolers for something. The younger folks just don't have a combined representative. So it's really important for them to understand. I had a friend, a very kind of cynical guy, that said there's only two real emotions in life: guilt and fear. And it's kind of a cynical way to look at the world, and don't smile much, but they are both very, I would disagree with him on that, but I would say that they're both motivating, and very motivating to people. If you are scared, you will do something. I'm not saying put a gun to a kid's head and say study civics, but they have to understand the relevance. They have to understand that if they don't become involved citizens, that bad things will happen, and that if they don't do it, and somebody else does that they don't agree with, that the policies will be drafted by people they disagree with. So you have to engage them at a young level to the relevance of what they're doing. That's why I think some of these, both of these fellows have talked about, and so have I, some of these youth government things and some of the youth involvement programs, whether it's through the FFA or through the whatever, it's really important because it's interesting to see these kids' faces light up when they actually see that they can have an effect. And I think some of those programs through the schools really have a long-term effect and are very good to get kids engaged in differences at an early age.
Great. Questions? I see a hand here in the front. If there's a microphone that can come over. Terrific. And if you can just introduce yourself and then ask a question.
I'm Giselle Huff with the Jacqueline Young Foundation. So you're talking about the Common Core and how different it is from what we've done traditionally in terms of teaching kids critical thinking and all of these things. But this is being overlaid on a system that isn't being modernized in any way, shape, or form. I'm surprised that I haven't heard anything about technology in the sense that if you think about something like Second Life, if you could make up a game that would teach citizenship because the kids would be empowered to actually activate themselves in a world of their own. You could do that in inner cities. You could do that anywhere where kids play games, which they do everywhere. So the idea that you're talking about changing the way children learn without talking about changing the delivery system of the stuff they learn is, I think, a big mistake. You're not going to get it where you want to go with the same thing you've been doing all along.
Governor Nixon, then Governor Hickenlooper.
I think there is a lot of good things going out there with technology and kids learning that way. A small town in Missouri called Owensville, in the middle of a very conservative area, has gone completely paperless. Each one of the kids supported by that school district gets an iPad when they start schools. They can be checked on in all they do. They communicate with each other in that regard. And I think there's a lot of good things going on at the local level in technology. And I think that many, many very, very good teachers are understanding that that's the place. I think we have to try to incent that behavior. I think we have to meet these kids where they are. But I do think, I can't speak for the other states, but I could give you countless examples of where educators at all levels have embraced technology to interact with those kids and are seeing remarkable returns because of it.
And even more specifically, last year, I think it was last year, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor was here speaking about civics and the importance of it, and she demonstrated a video game that was civics in nature and was clearly engaging and entertaining and fun. So that's happening. I wish I could remember the name of the game.
iCivics.
What's it called?
So her organization is called iCivics.
iCivics,
and they have
exactly.
About, 16.
So go
games
Google
now.
iCivics, and you'll find a couple of these games. They're pretty cool, but the question is, how do we get that information out again?
No, and I agree, and it's that old definition of insanity. You can't do things the same way and expect a different result. And again, I'm living it with my kids, and you're right. These games and you've got to find a way to incorporate that into this new curriculum in order to incentivize the kids to learn. And I'm glad Governor Hickenlooper brought up that iCivics because it was very provocative. And I don't know what the experience has been in this past year, but it would certainly be worthwhile in following up.
Yeah, I know that iCivics has expanded a lot and now has a bunch of games which they are testing. They're doing research on. They see that some students are actually going home and playing them after school. And that they're introducing them to like younger brothers and sisters. And interestingly too, there are other technology-mediated ways of helping young people engage in civic action, both in school and out of school, with badging. There's now a new move to badge kids for things that they do civically, and also young people organizing themselves online. There's Dumbledore's Army as sort of part of the Harry Potter Alliance. They organize themselves to combat various Horcruxes, they call them, for whoever's read Harry Potter. They identify bullying or the global warming, other sort of challenges that then they actually organize worldwide to try to battle, which is really exciting. And if we could bring some of that youth energy into the schools themselves, that would be pretty terrific. More questions? I see a hand over there. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Monica Allman, and I work in policy development at the Alliance for Excellent Education in D.C. The conversation about civic engagement is very important, and I do think that it should be a component along with college and career readiness. The part that I struggle with, though, is thinking about student populations that have been historically underserved. And when you think about African American students and Hispanic students who currently comprise 58% of the prison population, and they're only a quarter of the American population overall, when you think about students who come through school and end up in prison, and their lack of engagement as a result of not being able to vote once they leave prison. So my question is really to the governors, or what kind of policies are taking shape in your respective states that will curtail the school to prison pipeline so that when students actually leave school, they're leaving school and not entering prison, and they have the ability to participate as active engagers in society.
Well, one of the things is that we're doing in Nevada is what I talked about in my early remarks, which is going in terms of early literacy and ensuring that all the kids have an opportunity. We talk about this all day kindergarten. We're starting in the most at-risk schools in the state, and we're going to be up to 200 schools. We've increased the funding for the English language learners. Clark County School District, which is Las Vegas, has in excess of 50,000 English language learners that speak over 150 different languages. And that's an amazing and compelling statistic. And so that's where I'm putting a lot of resources right now. They're saying that, we all know about statistics, but that, if the kids can't learn or aren't reading by the time they hit third grade, it's a 70% possibility that they're not going to finish. So that's one of the things that I want to focus on, is that early literacy and success early on, which will help the kids succeed as they move on through school.
I think it's a point very well taken, and certainly of all the statistics, among the ethnic statistics of who votes and who doesn't, to see the African American community clearly has seen that civic engagement is a benefit to them and are willing to push themselves and organize themselves around that way. And yet, you look at the number of individuals with nonviolent felon, usually drug felonies, who lost their opportunity to vote, disenfranchises. That population is significantly skewed ethnically towards people of color. One of the challenges in Colorado is to figure out how do we get the Hispanic and Latino community to recognize that this is an avenue for their betterment as well. And most of us elected officials try to, I'm about the worst Spanish speaker there is, but I try to every year give 1 or 2 speeches in Spanish, go on to Spanish radio, to connect, again, take away a little of that power distance that separates all. I mean, it's true of all English language learners. It makes them feel at some distance from government, and help them see that participation leads to benefits, right? And it helps them get their fair share of government contracts if they've got a small business. There's a whole long list there.
Counter to what most social scientists would think, at least in Missouri, I can't speak to other states, but during this last recession in 9, 10, and 11, actually we had the crime rates drop in Missouri, which confounds most social scientists. Most social scientists will tell you that as the economy gets worse, crime goes up. There's a number of reasons for that. One of which is that the issues you talk about as far as individuals, that there's a history of crime in their family, you only win those battles one at a time. And we have a program that we founded a few years ago that I've expanded that works through Big Brothers and Big Sisters called Amachi, in which what we do is we attempt through our faith-based community to get a big for a significant percentage, if not all, of the kids whose father goes into prison. So that at that moment of time, that most crucial moment, that instead of those kids having a role model that has been cast asunder by society, in a sense, and having to pay a penalty for it, they have somebody in their life right then that agrees with the parent and with the caregivers, and it has had a remarkable success. We merged that then with a evidence-based technology to track each one of these kids through we got a group of folks here in the financial services to give their time and put together a computer model so that we could then track each one of these kids and what the difference was in their outcome. And it's been remarkable. Having that person that for the time period the father was gone, that was in those lives to assist and help and just be there, has dramatically increased, those kids going to school has dramatically increased their graduation rate, and we think ultimately will have a significant effect long-term on their future. But it's important to note, you win these battles one kid at a time. Every family is different, and you've got to get really in there at a micro level and do a lot of it to make a big long-term difference.
It'd be pretty amazing if, say, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, we could look back and see the shift from the school to prison pipeline for a number of kids and see it to be a school to civic action pipeline as well as to college and career. That would be an amazing change. I'm afraid that we had so much to say about these two questions that you're going to have to catch the governors during the break to ask them anything more. But any last thoughts that you want to share for what's been a really fascinating conversation?
No, I'm fine. Great.
Thank you so much for a really